one way of defining architecture is to say that it is construction charged with meaning. Yeah, and if we assume that is one way of talking about architecture, of course materials play a huge role in that. The way that I achieve that is because I think that in order to get an attachment to buildings, buildings need to be in the first way understandable, so the cognition experience or the cognitive approach should happen. In this way, materials for me can explain, make a building readable, no? That you can read, understand, so the cognitive plays an important role there in the attachment process, because when humans understand, they get attached. This is something that Aristotle said, no, it's not me. And the other approach have to be with the sensitive, and of course there's material that create by their own some kind of attachment to a, let's say, pre-verbal part of us. In this regard, there are some materials that play that role much better than others, I think. And wood in itself has this appealing related to the pre-verbal, but at the same time, if you use it expressing, let's say, how the structure is under work, you made the building readable. So with wood, I think what is interesting that you can achieve both the cognitive and the sensitive at the same time. That's why I'm quite interested in working with wood. I mean, the forces that build the city sometimes has nothing to do with architecture at all. No, there are some other decisions that have to do with what we can call the calculative, I don't know if it's the right way of thinking, no? That has to do with efficiency, movements, and so on and so on. And architects are losing that realm of action, and they are in a way dealing more with buildings. So in that kind of new space, we can make the building to create those public spaces that are no longer possible, let's say, for us. And so that's why I believe that more in relation with public buildings need not only to provide shelter inside the building, but also outside, so create public spaces around them. Like, well, this is not what was done by during the Renaissance, was very common, no, to do this kind of things, no. Cultural buildings by themselves are related with learning, no? As you mentioned, a theater is actually a learning space, social learning place, and in this case it happens because of the interrelation between the performance and the space itself. But on the other hand, public buildings, because nowadays they just not, I mean, there is a kind of let's say common assumption that cultural building needs to be multi-use space, so they have to fulfill many functions, not just the performance of the theater. We take that example because it happens once a day, probably not during the whole day, so there is a lot of vacant space that can be used for different uses. And in the case of the theater that I show, the community asks the building to perform different uses. So in that regard, what we did is to make it through some operations, to make it flexible in order to be able to become learning spaces, and also space, and for learning space, I mean for learning that happen in a more informal way through sharing. So that's why, I mean, the public spaces of this cultural building are very important, because they need to support sharing, no? Sharing experiences. No, for me it's been very very useful, I will say, in a very practical, because I agree that that learning, no, has to do with the body first of all, no, the body that is the receptor of the sensitive world and even the cognitive world. And in that relation, for me, I would say that it was very interesting to have this interdisciplinary approach with people that know very well that how the body behaves, let's say, in physiological terms and in psychological terms. And it's something that was very important during, I would say, 50s, if we think, or 70s, and it's something that's been, I don't say hidden, because probably there is too much theory around architecture that is eating itself, I would say, and that, but it's not relating with the real experience of spaces. And for me, architects like Irarrazaval were very aware of those issues, no? I mean, how the spaces behaves in terms of light, in terms of comfort, acoustic comfort, and by then it was a very important issue. If you think of Richard Neutra, for instance, he was very aware of the last achievement or new advancement in science of the body. That's why if you see some of Neutra's house, you start realizing why are so different materials on them, no? So it's a space that is not thought to be, let's say, received in visual terms, but only with the other senses, which is what makes, I mean, when all these senses are under control, well organized, composed, is when one as a user feel okay in those spaces. So for me it's quite important, quite useful, all these lectures. What I like is that it's taking things that are being forgotten, that are very important, and I think school needs to be always aware of what's going on, being in tune what is needed, and of course there are, let's say, themes that yesterday or past year were important, like sustainability, but we can see that it's something achieved now. You no longer need to, I mean, it's like the, how you say, the bottom line of everything, but those things I think are important now, and you are doing a very good job remembering architects and students that this is a very important issue.